Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Tourism and Sport for the fiscal financial year ending May 31st, 2026. I'd ask that we go around the table, have members introduce themselves. For the record, Minister, if you could introduce the officials who are sitting with you at the table. My name is Shane Getz. I'm the MLA for Laxton and Parkland, chair of this committee, and the constituency I refer to often as God's country. So with that, we'll start our introductions to the right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin Wright, MLA for the charming constituency of Cypress Medicine.
Ron Weeb, MLA, Grand Prairie Wapiti.
Chantal de Jong, MLA for Chestermere Strathmore.
Scott Sear, MLA Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul.
Jason Stephan, MLA Red Deer South.
Sure. Joseph Scow, Minister of Tourism and Sport and Government House Leader and MLA for Carson Siksika. To my right is my Deputy Minister, David Goldstein. To my right is my Assistant Deputy Minister, Paul Amaru. To my left is my Finance Executive Director, Carmen Vidari. And to my left is Senior Financial Officer, Jeff Dumont.
Good evening, MLA Heather Sweet, Edmonton Manning.
Good evening, Sarah El Maligi, MLA Banff Kananaskis.
Good evening, Nicole Goring, MLA Edmonton Castle Downs.
Good evening, Julia Hayter, MLA for Calgary Edgemont.
And you don't feel like introducing yourself? Then I won't either. I'd like to note the following substitutions to the record. Ms. Hayter for member Loyola, Deputy Chair. Oh, actually, we have one member online. Let's go to member online as well. I see member Loyola.
It's MLA Rod Loyola for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I'd like to go back to the substitutions to the records for Ms. Hayter for member Loyola as Deputy Chair, Ms. Sweet for member Beaupry, Mr. Weeb for Mr. Van Dyken, and Ms. Goring in for member Hoyle. So with that, a few housekeeping items before we turn to business hands. The microphones are going to be operated by the folks of Hansard, so we don't have to be touching any switches. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet or broadcast on Assembly TV online. The audio video stream and the transcripts of the meeting can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to turn on your camera while speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. Remote participants who wish to be placed on the speakers list are asked to email or message through the committee clerk. The gentleman to my left who didn't want to be introduced. The members in the room should signal the chair, so you do have to get my attention. I am not a mind reader, so get my attention and I'll put you on the list. Please set your cell phones to the least disturbing setting provided possible. Speaking rotation and time limits. So this is the first one we're kicking off here for this year. So if it's not familiar, folks, bear with me. My voice is a little bit sore and raspy here today. So just allow me to get through this here. So honorable members, the main estimate for the Ministry of Tourism and Sport should be considered for 2 hours. Standing Order 5901 sets out the process for consideration of the main estimates in the legislative policy committees. Suborder 59017 sets out the speaking rotations for this meeting. The speaking rotation chart is available on the committee's internal website, and hard copies are provided to the ministry officials at the table. For each segment of the meeting, blocks of speaking time will be combined only if both the minister and the member speaking agree. If debate is exhausted prior to the 2 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the main estimate schedule, and the committee will adjourn. Should members have any questions regarding the speaking time or the rotation, please email or message the committee clerk about the process. Ministry officials who are present may, at the direction of the minister, address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to a microphone in the gallery and are asked to please introduce themselves into the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes and other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. And it doesn't look like we'll have a problem tonight with that. We've got lots of chairs around the table. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise, and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the block of the speaking time of the overall 2-hour meeting shall continue. So the shot clock still goes on. We'll continue to run down. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates shall be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. And finally, The committee should have the opportunity to hear both questions and answers. Questions and answers, this is an interesting concept, without interruptions during the estimates debate. Debate flows through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking, when time is shared between the member and the minister. And you'll find the chair to be very happy to look at you, to talk to you during the whole time, and take any of those items that may cause a little friction off the table. I would like to now invite the Minister of Tourism and Sport to begin your opening remarks. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to discuss the Ministry of Tourism and Sports budget for the budget 2025. I've already introduced my members of my executive team to my right and my left, but I'd also like to take this moment as I'm joined by members of the ministry executive team in my office here or in the gallery. And I wholeheartedly appreciate their support and remarkable work these past couple of years, so I wanted to take a moment to publicly thank them. It is through them that we are able to accomplish all the work that we are speaking about today. The Ministry of Tourism and Sport was established in 2023, so in many ways it is still quite new. The past year has been full. The past year is the first full year that the ministry has worked through, and in that time, we have encouraged Albertans to be active by supporting sport and recreation facilities and access to affordable activities across the province. We have continued to build Alberta's reputation as an attractive destination to host world-class sporting events and continue to grow the visitor economy across the province. With an operating budget of $132.7 million, we will continue to work with communities and businesses across the province and partners across Alberta and international markets to achieve the ministry's goals. Last year, the tourism strategy was launched to chart a path forward to our goal of growing Alberta's tourism sector to $25 billion in annual visitor expenditures by 2035, a goal we intend to reach. The All-Season Resorts Act was passed in the fall of 2024, which will help us reach this goal by diversifying the province's economy and creating more opportunities for Albertans to enjoy activities such as hiking, biking, and skiing in our own backyard. We are building the team of environmental and land management experts to staff the new All-Season Resorts branch in my ministry. The All-Season Resorts Act is a made-in-Alberta answer to the very successful model in British Columbia, which was established nearly 2 decades ago. The new sole life cycle regulator established under this act will streamline approval processes while maintaining environmental review and better support resort proposals, which will increase investor confidence in Alberta and attract private capital into the province's tourism sector. Alberta's government remains committed to Indigenous consultation through the regulatory process, as we do with all of our natural resource decisions. We are currently engaging with Indigenous communities across Alberta about all-season resort policy and regulation. Through the new regulator of all-season resorts, local communities will be engaged and resort developments will help strengthen rural economies in partnership with local businesses, Indigenous opportunities, and in keeping with the cultural fabric of the community. We look forward to updating Albertans about all-season resorts as the new branch and program are established over the coming months. It is through Travel Alberta, the province's destination management organization, that we are driving towards many of the goals and outcomes in the tourism strategy. To continue the successes gained since last year, Alberta's government is providing $75.2 million to Travel Alberta in budget 2025. As we all know, Jasper experienced devastating wildfires last summer. Alberta's government is committed to a strong return of tourism businesses, accommodation providers, and visitors to Jasper. That's why, through Travel Alberta, Alberta's government provided an immediate $2.5 million to support tourism recovery in Jasper to ensure the town continues to be a strong tourist destination. With more than $3 million in additional support for Jasper announced last week, Alberta's government has now provided a total assistance package of more than $181 million to ensure Alberta Jasper residents and businesses are supported as the community recovers from last summer's wildfire. And we will continue to provide support to help the town have a strong start for this upcoming tourism season. I want to remind everyone that Jasper is open for business. Now is the time to visit Jasper. I encourage everyone to enjoy Jasper's world-class hospitality, tourism operators, and experiences. making new memories in Jasper and helping the community to rebuild stronger than ever. Developing emerging destinations, including in rural Alberta, will help Albertans discover new places in their own backyard, and visitors will have even more authentic Alberta experiences. Through Travel Alberta, Alberta's government is working closely with operators, community leaders, and residents across Alberta to boost our visitor economy in new areas of the province. Travel Alberta continues their effort to increase flights coming into Alberta, especially since most international visitors who come to Alberta fly here. As a result, over the last year, WestJet has announced increased air access to Calgary, including a new direct flight from Seoul, South Korea, direct flight from Tokyo expanded to year-round service, and a new Mexico City route launching in May. We look forward to these increased opportunities to bring the world to our doorstep, where they get to experience the beauty and vastness of our lands and landscapes. With 1 in 3 international travelers seeking authentic Indigenous experiences, Indigenous tourism is playing an important role in achieving our tourism goals. Our government is directing $8.85 million between 2021 and 2026 to Indigenous Tourism Alberta, the largest provincial commitment in Indigenous tourism in the country's history. In keeping with our government's commitments to Indigenous communities, I believe that it is important to highlight that the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation's mandate was expanded to include investment in tourism in October of 2024. This exciting change helps Indigenous communities across access funding to invest in major projects across Alberta's world-class tourism destinations. Indigenous tourism revenues in Alberta reached $258 million in 2023 and are projected to exceed $293 million by 2026. This growth will strengthen economic opportunities for Indigenous peoples in Alberta, both now and in the future. We look forward to advancing these goals further because tourism means jobs. We have made great strides on the sports side of our ministry as well, including the mandate to develop a program to invest in sport and recreation infrastructure to help Alberta's communities to remain vibrant, healthy, and actively engaged in the sports they love. We launched the Active Communities Initiative, which in 2024 committed $10 million to support 19 projects across the province. This is the first grant program in Alberta that is dedicated exclusively to sport and recreation facilities. Budget 2025 continues this commitment with $10 million for sport and recreation facilities that are at the heart of many communities. These investments are more than just building facilities. They're about building healthier families and more resilient communities by creating opportunities for more Albertans to be more active more often. Through the Every Kid Can Play program, with the stable and ongoing funding of $8 million, we continue to provide opportunities for kids to participate in the sports they love, no matter their financial status. The program was first launched in 2023, and since then has provided financial support to more than 12,200 children and youth to subsidize sport and recreation program costs. Sport is for everyone, and Alberta's government is working hard to ensure no child is forced to watch from the sidelines. Budget 2025 continues to support events like the Canadian Finals Rodeo in Edmonton, which I had the honor of attending last year and presenting awards to the winners. Our commitment of funding for this event helped to ensure that it continues to be right here in Alberta. It's important to ensure this provincial tradition continues to thrive in our province while preserving jobs and boosting the local economy. Several major hockey events were funded last year and will continue to be supported in the next few years, including the 2027 IIHF World Junior Championship, 2 Hlinka Gretzky World Cups, one of which took place last year and the next in 2026, 2 Canada versus United States National Women's Rivalry Series games in the upcoming year, and the 2024 World Para Ice Hockey Championships that took place last year, and 4 years of Hockey Canada summer camps. It was remarkable to witness the positive economic impacts the events had in 2024 in the province, and we look forward to the events in the upcoming years. In addition, major sporting events continue to bring great benefits to our province, which we supported in the past budget and will continue to support through our major sporting events grant program through Budget 2025. These events can have an economic impact in the millions of dollars per event. build on the province's reputation as a premier host for major events and an attractive travel destination for visitors from around the world, and expand our sports sector's capacity to deliver world-class sporting events. Sport tourism is on the rise, and Alberta is positioning ourselves as a hub for sports activity. These are just some of the highlights our ministry has accomplished over the past year and will continue to accomplish through Budget 2025. Alberta is a beautiful province with so much to showcase for both sports and tourism. That is why this ministry was formed, to focus on opportunities that will strengthen our amateur sports system and increase visitor economy.
As the speaker may say, I hesitate to interrupt, but we have reached the end of your time, Minister. Thank you for the presentation. One other housekeeping item I want to bring to everyone's attention, if you're good with it. Makes it really handy for the chair and those following along at home if we keep it to the fiscal. If we talk about the government estimates, ministry business plan, strategic plan, fiscal plan, that's awfully good as well. And if we can keep it within the ministry, that makes it awfully handy. Not the boast, but this committee last year, we only had 2 points of order of 9 entire meetings through the whole time. So I'm hoping we can break our record. MLA Sweet, I'm looking at you. So if we can keep with that, it seems to help decorum quite a bit, you guys, and obviously gets your questions answered a little bit better. So with that, for the first 50 minutes, it goes to the official opposition. And the minister, you guys can go back and forth or block time, that's up to you. If it is shared time, so if block time, it's 20 minutes, which can't be exceeded, and then you can go back and forth with the questions no longer than 10 minutes each. If the time is not shared, then it's still that 20-minute segment, but it's 10 and 10. So with that, MLA Goring, you caught my attention first. And I'm going to open it up to you if you want to ask the minister that fun question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, are you open to going back and forth?
You know, I'm usually inclined to do block time, but today, for you, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I do reserve the right to go back to block time now.
Time you're around, on to the races.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that's joining the minister at the table today. I'm looking forward to getting through the budget and getting some answers to some of the questions that have been brought to me from many stakeholders across the province. So, Minister, starting off, we know that tourism and sport are absolutely essential pillars of the Alberta's economy, culture, and community well-being. Tourism is also a significant economic contributor, rivaling some resource extraction practices even, yet it continually is underfunded and isn't supported with an effective strategy that leverages this potential and amplifies this economic revenue in ways that support local communities, enhance ecosystems, and address truth and reconciliation meaningfully. However, the lack of transparency in funding allocations, absence of timely investment in rebuilding Jasper, and the need for stronger Indigenous tourism and sport development initiatives raise serious concern. While your opening remarks and statements talking about funding tourism sound wonderful, the total operating for the ministry has been cut by $1.9 million. When we adjust for population and inflation, this amounts to about an $8.4 million cut. Minister, so in your opening remarks, you talked about supporting Jasper with $181 million. Could you specifically say where that money went?
Well, I want to thank the member for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. And I think you've already hit on some very important points. The first of which is that tourism and sport, I think, are essential pillars of Alberta's economy. Since this ministry was created, and I give full credit to the Premier for seeing the vision of having a Ministry of Tourism and Sport, allowing me to focus entirely on those two mandates. As someone who is a product of sport, I like to think that it's done so much for me in my own life and my ability to manage time, learn all the kinds of skills that you get on the playing field or on the court, whatever it may be, that sometimes you just can't get in the classroom. And then, of course, on the tourism side, the honourable member mentioned the economic benefits. Tourism does mean jobs.
Minister, I hesitate to interrupt.
Sure.
You had 10 minutes to open. Can you please answer the question so that we can go back and forth? The question again is where the $181 million to support Jasper is being spent specifically.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to mention that right off the bat, we made a point of supporting Jasper's destination marketing organization to continue to advertise Jasper as a world-class destination. I'm a firm believer, and I suspect members around this table would also argue, that Jasper is a crowning jewel of our province. We feel very strongly about that. And so that's why we needed to make sure that we manage the reputation of our province, that Jasper will come back stronger. It was certainly a very difficult time for that community. But a lot of that was done in advertising to tell international markets that we need to reach our tourism goal of $25 billion by 2035. The Jasper is open, it will be open, and now is a great time to visit. Myself, I've been to Jasper recently. I was there with the Federal Minister of Tourism to explain the importance of the community, to talk about the funding commitments that we have made. And, and it's important, working with Travel Alberta, to understand that if we're going to get people back to Jasper, if we're going to communicate to them that it's open and that they have the world-class tourism visitation opportunities, whether it's the hotels, whether it's the ski hills, whether it's hiking, golfing, we need to be able to advertise that to international markets. So I think it's very important that we invested that money there. And I'm happy to have my deputy minister to continue to talk a little bit about the funding that we have given and the work that Travel Alberta has done with Jasper since the fires ended, and now that we're now working on recovery.
Thanks, Minister. The $181 million is a whole of government approach to Jasper, which includes several ministries as part of the wildfire response group. The specific aid from our portfolio came in almost $3 million of direct support to Tourism Jasper to keep the doors open and allow their staff to continue the work and help them undertake some of the investments they were already committed to in the international markets. That includes the Go Media project with Destination Canada that is going to come there in the fall, which is going to bring 200 international journalists to Jasper. I don't have to spend all the time today going through, but there's a series of initiatives just to say that organizations like that are funded usually through a destination marketing fund. When, of course, the hotels closed for a period of time, those funds weren't coming in. So we sort of were the bridge financing mechanism for that organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 221 of the government's estimates, line 2.3 allocates $75.25 million to Travel Alberta for tourism growth and diversification, which, to be clear, is a cut. Can the minister break down how these funds will be used and what specific programs or regions will benefit? Just for those following along at home, Travel Alberta is working to support 10 tourism development zones across the province. Many of these zones are in rural areas who have not yet developed a robust tourism plan. They offer truly achieving, to be able to truly achieve their potential for visitor experiences and economic revenue. They will require support to develop strategic tourism plans, nurture investment opportunities, and implement a successful tourism product. Will the Travel Alberta funding be allocated to them? Which zones will take priority, and how will the funding be distributed to local businesses to support tourism growth? Will Travel Alberta be doing anything to incentivize its investment in tourism-related infrastructure like hotels and restaurants to support local tourism in rural communities in these tourism developmental zones?
Thank you, member, for the question. I'm just kind of a lot to unpack there as I just kind of make a couple of notes. But you made an excellent point. The tourism development zones in the province are 10 strategically located areas that we think, in collaboration with Travel Alberta, have a high potential for development and output. As I mentioned, our goal of reaching $25 billion by 2035 is one that is certainly lofty, but I think very achievable. But given the compression that we've seen in places like Jasper and Banff, understanding that those areas are seeing increased visitation without expansion, we are looking to find new places to disperse visitors who are coming here from around Alberta, visiting their own backyard, coming from around the country, and then, of course, from around the world. And so the purpose of the tourism development zones was to look at places that we could make targeted investments in new world-class tourism products. Now, I mentioned a little bit about them in my opening remarks with regards to Indigenous tourism, and I can elaborate on that later. But what I can say is, to your initial question to the member through the chair, that we did have a decrease in the budget, but it was only because of the phasing out or ending of what was a rural Alberta development program that we had. So that was a short 2-year program, a top-up, that effectively was created through the previous Minister of Agriculture. That program has been, the 2-year timeline of that program has ended. But what I think is important to note, again to the member's question, is that we are continuing to invest in rural Alberta. And I talked earlier about this crowning jewel of Jasper and Banff and Lake Louise, but to have crowning jewels, you have to have a crown. And that's what I believe these 10 TDZs or tourism development zones are. And they give us an opportunity to look at these areas that are strategically located from a traveling perspective, proximal to an airport, as we talked about earlier. And, but the target investments, I'm sure my Deputy Minister and CEO Travel Alberta could talk a little more about it. But I think it's important to note that I've been to a number of these places, personally gone out and visited with the travel operators, and they are so grateful that this government sees the vision of tourism as an economic driver. And then if you talk to some of the local businesses around there that are having induced benefits from, increased purchasing of products, whether it's meat or poultry or even things like homemade bedding, right? Like all the things that are culturally relevant to those areas. So I'm happy to throw it to David Goldstein, the Deputy Minister of Travel Alberta, to talk a little more about the specific investments we're making in those TDZs.
Thank you, Minister, and to the chair, to the member. We had a unique challenge in Alberta where 65% of the, pre-COVID, 65% of the tourism revenue was in 5 destinations and was heavily in the summer season. So part of this was an econometric view of what was the capacity in other parts of the province, and putting the 2 northern TDZs aside for a second, they're all sort of within a 1.5 to 2 hour drive of one of the international airports. And we're investing with entrepreneurs and communities to the tune of almost $65 million over the last 3 years to actually build product in those various regions, so that when we go into the international marketplace, we actually have itineraries that we can sell to international and U.S. customers. You asked the question, what are the priorities? Well, we don't have favorite children. There are some areas that are going to be more advanced than others, and we hope it'll be an escalator for all those parts of the province, particularly in the north, where we have it's more difficult, but we see tremendous opportunities and have been working with Grand Prairie and Fort Mac and other parts of the province. Happy to elaborate further.
Thank you very much. So 2 of them are the legacy destinations, like the Rocky Mountain Parks and Drumheller. I'm curious how they're going to continue to develop the infrastructure required to successfully host the world. You talked about being able to expand and look at new destinations, and I'm assuming that's through the recent piece of legislation. But can you talk specifically about those 2 destinations?
Sorry, member, could you repeat the 2 destinations?
Rocky Mountain Parks and Drumheller.
Sure. I'm happy to speak more broadly about the issue you raised, which is about infrastructure. I think it's a great point. As we develop more places for people to visit, they have to find a way to get there. I mean, that's just natural occurrence here. And so understanding that, I think that strategic development of these tourism development zones, making sure the proper infrastructure is available in those areas, that's certainly vital. When we look at something like our all-season resorts, the process would be that we are looking at master plans that people would that would propose to the department. They would review them on a merit base, and then looking at the other factors surrounding those. So, are there roads available? The other side is, if people are coming to Alberta, we have a reputation to maintain that we have already established and will continue to establish as a premier destination. If people are coming here to see something like Drumheller, as the member mentioned, and they are not traveling on roads that are comfortable because they're full of potholes or there's high traffic, we have to address those issues. And so as we develop and look at the long-term tourism strategy, this is where I like to think that me and my colleagues are either tourism or tourism adjacent, understanding we all have a role to play in creating what is a very hospitable and welcoming environment for this province. So I don't have specific numbers or for the 2 areas that you mentioned. But what I can say is that I've taken this into consideration. I've spoken with my colleague, Minister McIver, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Minister Dreeshen, Minister of Transportation, and others, as we work towards this goal of reaching our tourism spending goal in 2035, understanding there would be some demands on infrastructure. And so I think it's important to know that, we also have constraints on other areas. We look at something like Parks Canada and the ability that we have to work in the parks, given that it's national jurisdiction, right? So understanding that those areas, expansion is very difficult. we have to look outside the parks and where we can develop. And so that is the long-term plan, but we are going to continue to integrate the infrastructure demands as we also build on the tourism products.
Thank you very much, Minister. Through the chair. So now to go on a little bit about tourism diversification and regional development. So given Alberta's heavy reliance on mountain tourism, what strategies is the ministry implementing to expand tourism in other regions such as Indigenous tourism, agritourism, culture tourism, and specifically what portion of the tourism budget is specifically allocated to Indigenous-led tourism businesses and rural tourism expansions?
Sure. Answer the Indigenous part. Sure. No, it's okay. I'll start with the Indigenous tourism question first, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. I think the member again has raised a very good point. Indigenous tourism is vital to our tourism mix, but I also think it's not just about tourism, it's about sharing Alberta's story. This Indigenous culture and communities have been in the province since time immemorial and are part of this fabric and the story that we tell. I've traveled overseas a number of times to talk about Alberta's tourism strategy and our long-term tourism goals, and they are impossible. I repeat, they are impossible without Indigenous tourism. I've heard from buyers in international markets who have said that 2/3 of their clients want an authentic Indigenous tourism experience. So you look at a product like Métis Crossing just up by Smoky Lake, which is a boutique hotel and Métis cultural experience. A place I've been to, they have beautiful sky viewing domes and also a bison reserve. And it's a place that I encourage all members of this committee and the millions of people at home watching this committee at this moment to visit that place, because it is a world-class tourism destination. But that we see the vision of something like Métis Crossing or something like Painted Warriors Ranch, which I'll talk about in a moment. Investments need to be made. So we're committing over $8 million between 2021 and 2026, which is the largest investment in Indigenous tourism in the country. I repeat, the largest investment in Indigenous tourism in the country, because we understand what I think others are just figuring out, is that Indigenous tourism is vital to the health and well-being of a vibrant tourism sector.
Thank you very much, Minister. Through the chair. The current performance indicators for visitation and tourism sector employment reflect growth from 2021 to 2023, which is on page 165 of the business plan. Are there targets for these sectors in the coming years? And why are the expenditures from tourism and the amount generated by the tourism levy the only performance metrics with targets in coming years?
Sorry, member, just repeat the question. So are you asking about why are we only using spending and levy as the metrics for success?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to set my deputy minister up again to talk a little more about the numbers and do a bit of a deeper dive. But what I can say at a high level is there are a number of ways to measure visitation in the province. You can look at things like hotel stays, you can look at things like restaurant visitation, you can look at the number of times someone visits a specific attraction. But what it really comes down to is how much are people spending in Alberta? How much is the economy benefiting from visitation, whether that's leisure travel, whether that's business travel, whether you're visiting friends and family, sports tourism, etc. And so I don't think it's necessarily a knock to use spending as a metric for success. Because if we look at people coming in, we might have a large number of visitors coming into the province, but if they're not spending very much, we're not actually going to see the economic benefit. And I've heard actually from municipalities as we've met with them to talk about the expansion of tourism in Alberta into regions that you could say are underrepresented in the tourism mix. And they have expressed concerns. They have expressed concerns about high visitation numbers without real addition or adding value to the local market. So I'll give you an example. If you're going down to the Crow's Nest Pass area, some people will go down there and they'll spend 2 or 3 weeks in glamping, or they'll come down there with an RV. They'll bring their own entertainment with a side-by-side or a motorcycle. They'll bring their own food. So really they're coming in, using the area, which is fine because it's a beautiful place to visit. But if they're not shopping locally, we don't really count that necessarily as additions to the local economy. So this is a large part as to why we're looking at attracting more international visitors, because they stay longer and they spend more. So I'm really pleased because last year, we again exceeded records of visitor spending in 2023, which was $12.7 billion. $3 billion of that, $3 billion was from international visitors, another record for us. So we are blown past pre-pandemic level spending. We are now into what I think is the upward trajectory. And with the introduction of the All-Season Resorts Act, and many of these resorts hopefully coming online in the coming years, that number is just going to continue to skyrocket when we reach our goal by $25 billion 2035 or sooner. Now, I'm happy to turn over to my Deputy Minister to talk a little bit about some of the other key points to answer the question.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chair, just to circle back on part of the member's question, I think you're referring to page 165, item ID, performance indicators. That, and you asked why we did not forecast forward past 23, was that the question? Yeah.
Yes.
This is, to my understanding, and I'll be challenged if wrong, but I think this is the Treasury Board template that we work on. So this is the information the Treasury Board asks us for. So we, of course, have, we do metrics looking forward. We have a very robust, at Travel Alberta, a very robust data group that works on this stuff. But I think for the purposes of this report, and I believe you asked the question about KPIs generally, I would refer you to the annual report of Travel Alberta that has very explicit KPIs on how the marketing campaigns perform, what resident sentiment is in Alberta for tourism, what we have very specific ROI numbers for our aviation and our economic development investment funds that are the economic investment funds I think are set at a 3-to-1 ratio or 4-to-1 ratio. There are two separate ones which include the number of private sector dollars that are co-invested. And so we've blown through the door on that one as we see larger projects and more success. So there are very specific KPIs that are put together in the business plan, approved by the minister, approved by the board and then on to the minister to be signed off.
Thank you very much. So I just want to circle back to rebuilding Jasper and the national park tourism. So in your opening remarks, was the first time that Jasper was mentioned in any part of the documents that we've been going through for estimates. So there's zero direct mention of funding for rebuilding Jasper in the budget. Given its economic importance and recent wildfires and infrastructure damage, what financial or logistics support is being provided going forward? So not what you've already invested, but what you're intending to do going forward. Is the province coordinating with the federal government to secure disaster relief for tourism infrastructure funding for Jasper? And what targeted investments are planned for Jasper's tourism sector given its critical role? So when we're trying to entice visitors, but there's no investment in the community, how can we show that we're actually supporting the existing community? Jasper is critical to Alberta's economy. In 2023, international visitors spent $2.9 billion in Alberta, a $600 million increase from the pre-pandemic, and Jasper accounts for approximately 22 to 25% of tourism expenditures in the Canadian Rockies. So if you could, Minister, through the chair, if you could very specifically show in this budget how you're supporting Jasper going forward.
In here for edification too, so with that, I'm sure the member is aware too, this is tourism and sport, there might be some overlaps in other ministries, but I'll allow the minister to answer, but in case it isn't there, that's probably. So Minister, over to you.
Sure. Well, supporting Jasper is vital to the future of Alberta tourism. And some of the projects that we're working on with the community of Jasper are ongoing. So while we have committed to a number of programs in the past, we continue to work with them and advertise with them. I will digress for a moment because I think it's important to note that Jasper, and remind everyone that Jasper is in a national park. And as a government, we jumped immediately to the aid of Jasper. Our Premier has led our cabinet colleagues working with this and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs as we deal with the ongoing challenges of the recovery in Jasper, everything from taking down houses and tearing up foundations to helping to rebuild businesses. We have effectively done this alone without the help of the federal government. I have appreciated working with the municipality of Jasper, but I can tell you that for a community that is located in a national park, I have felt that the federal government, whether it's not knowing which minister we're working with, whether it's Minister Boissonnault, Minister Sajan, Minister Ferrada, the Prime Minister, I mean, the list goes on and on. I don't even know who's looking at it today. But what I can tell you, Mr. Chair, to all members of the committee and watching that, the province of Alberta has Jasper's back. We committed immediately $2.5 million, but we also announced last week another $3 million to provide a total assistance package, which adds to about $181 million. Housing, it's another issue. We're working with the community, they're moving ahead with that, but it's been a very difficult time working with the federal government. It is a disaster in Ottawa right now. And to be so bold as to say that we need an election, I think is understating the case. The reality is we need real leadership in Ottawa, working with our provincial government to help Jasper, which is in a national park, through the recovery process.
Folks, maybe to keep the decorum. I understand the sensitivities around Jasper. It's where a bunch of my friends grew up. I was out there as well the day after in the first visits on site, so this is very near and dear to all of us. But we want to try to keep the conversations germane to the estimates itself, back to the questions. I will give some latitude for both sides for that because it is a sensitive item, but just so we can kind of maybe steer it out of the corners before it goes there. The other one too is at the start when we talked about shared time, it does go back 10 minutes at max on both sides. So I appreciate your interjection and I'll try to keep an eye on that. So I'll give you guys a little bit of latitude on here, but yeah, bring it back to the estimates if we could, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just what I was wanting to intervene on is that the feds did step up, and blaming the feds for not cooperating when the government was negotiating with Jasper on how best to support them and withholding funds unless the federal government did something, which is something that a provincial government has never done in a crisis response to wildfires, floods, or anything. So
Remember, just to keep it in context. So again, it's going to be difficult, guys. Again, I appreciate it's near and dear to everyone's hearts. Tourism and sport has a certain scope. If we can concentrate on that scope, and again, to the minister as well, broader conversation or broader discussions may not be helpful to getting through the estimate or to decorum. So we can just consider that the last shot fired and go back to the estimates if we could, please, and so be specific to it. And Minister, if you could reciprocate by responding in kind.
Sure. Well, you know what I'll do? I will let my Deputy Minister, David Goldstein, talk a little bit about the targeted investments that are being made in Jasper. I think that would also assist to answer the question that the Honourable Member had asked. But like you said, Mr. Chair, this is a very emotional time. I've been to Jasper. I've driven around the community to see things, to see burnt out cars, to see burnt toys strewn on. I mean, these are people's livelihoods. This community needs help, and we have stepped up in every way possible despite barriers. But I will let Mr. Goldstein add to that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just for the, I missed part of the last answer, so I apologize. It was not just marketing support that we provided, and the member asked a very good question about the other supports. This is a staged approach, and there were about 6 or 7 businesses that we needed to get back up and running in order to run a winter season. You know, as you know, winter is a slight, I don't want to kill too much time on the clock, but winter is obviously a slower season and a reduced number of available hotel rooms, and we were really focused on getting the ski operation up and running and back again and supporting that. But then, and I won't go through all of them because of time, but there were a series of investments that Travel Alberta made. I don't know who's been there lately, but some of you will remember Moline Canyon used to have an ice climbing attraction, which of course was no longer available, but we actually worked with that entrepreneur in the town council to create another ice climbing structure in the middle of town. So there was something for folks to do when they came there, and I think when the final numbers come out, which will probably be at the end of next month, they actually had a decent winter. Like, we obviously want the visitor economy to be stronger, but from hotel occupancy and spend, they made it through sort of the toughest part of the year, and then the next phase of investments will come in probably spring and summer. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Moving on to workforce development and labor shortages. So the business plan highlights a tourism and hospitality immigration stream. Can the minister provide a timeline for implementation and an estimate of how many workers will be supported through this stream?
It's been fully subscribed.
Thank you to the Honourable Member for the question through the Chair. I can confirm that the program is up and running. It is fully subscribed already. you have addressed what I think is a central issue in tourism in the province. There is a possibility of becoming victims of our own success and having a tourism sector grow so fast, we don't have the labor force to sustain it. That is why we have put in the tourism strategy, government collaboration, to make sure that we are collaborating among my colleagues. I mentioned this earlier. If you're not the Minister of Tourism, I think you're tourism adjacent. And that, of course, goes for the Minister of Advanced Education, Rajan Sani, my colleague. And working with her, with the post-secondary institutions, to help create more interest and more programs that directly drive students into the tourism sector. I've often said that people look at tourism who don't know a lot about it and think it's a job. There are countless careers in tourism, well-paying, mortgage-paying, grocery-buying, sports fee-paying jobs and careers in tourism. And I think part of my job as the minister is to help change the paradigm about working in tourism. It's not a temporary stop. I can't tell you how many conventions I've gone to and spoken at, and I'll ask, how many people here started right at the bottom, where you're bussing tables or you're, doing something else in the tourism sector, and a lot put their hands up. And they'll tell you right off the hop, I started bussing tables for a 6-month opportunity, and that was 20 years ago. And I hear that time and time again because it's such an incredible environment to work in. So it's certainly understanding the labor shortages we have in the sector. We also have issues with staff accommodation. This is something that we will address, I believe, in master plans when we look at the All-Season Resorts Act. But if you look at a place like Banff, or you look at a place like Lake Louise, given that it's in a national park, we have more visitation, but we do not have expanded opportunities for people to stay who work in those areas. You can imagine the kind of problem that creates for employers who are trying to find places to have their staff stay close to or proximal to the attraction. It's very difficult. And so for that reason, we continue to try to make the case to our federal counterparts in Parks Canada that we need more staff accommodation. A perfect example of this would be Lake Louise. This is a community with a world-class ski hill. World-class. You ask, I can tell you, I've been all over the world selling Alberta's tourism sector, and there are a couple words that don't need a translator. One is Lake Louise, the other one is sunshine. Banff is another word, right? Like Jasper, these are, people know these areas, and they want to go. It's a bucket list for them. But if the attractions are over, are max capacity, and there's no more staff to stay close by, what are we supposed to do? And so understanding that you address the labor issues, streamline labor into the tourism sector. Also look at, as the member talked about, the immigration stream, working with my colleague, the Minister Yassine, who's doing a terrific job in this file. It's a whole mix, and we're going to get there. But at the moment, we do understand the constraints, and we're working with my colleagues to try to resolve those issues.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'm happy to hear that you're collaborating with multi-ministries, because it is important to make sure that we have a strong sector within, bringing young people into this field to work in. It's really important to make sure that that's happening. So when we're talking about having communication with other ministries and making sure that, with our population growth, that there's a taxing that happens on our healthcare, education, social support systems. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you're working with other ministries to ensure that tourism and hospitality workers, when they come to Alberta, that they'll have access to a doctor, that their kids are going to have a school, and that there will be houses for them to live in?
Well, through the chair, thank you to the member for that question. And I can say right off the hop that on a formal and informal basis, I am continually communicating with my colleagues in cabinet about the importance of their ministry with respect to tourism. We talked about, the infrastructure for roads. We talked about the need for more schools, need for hospitals. But I would also say going down or through the chain, there's also more communication and collaboration with departments. So my deputy minister sits at a deputy minister's table where this is constantly a topic of conversation. My ADM does the same thing. So we understand the value of the labor force in this province. We understand that as we increase visitation and increase demand on those products, and people need a place to stay, we also have to have a place for them to go to school, for their kids to go to school. speaking from the sports perspective, we have to have a place for their kids and them as individuals to recreate, to build community. And so I can talk about this, as I'm sure it'll come up later, but the Active Communities Initiative, a $10 million investment. This is within the Ministry of Tourism and Sport. But if you look at what we're doing outside of that, collaborating, this is the essence of the tourism strategy, is engaging my colleagues. And the Premier, again, her vision of having a minister that can go from one colleague to the next, making the case for tourism, because this is a huge economic driver. This is a huge economic driver. And you look at other economies around the world that are expanding their tourism offerings. Look at a place like Saudi Arabia. You know, they are seeing the value of tourism, an economy that is almost entirely based on petroleum and natural resources. Now they're expanding into tourism. People around the world are seeing the importance of the tourism sector. But to that point as well, we are amazing players in a very competitive international market. And if we don't manage this properly, we will not maintain the reputation we have as a world-class destination. But I think our tourism strategy has done an excellent job managing this so far, and I think the future is bright.
Thank you, Minister. On page 9 of this strategy plan, Objective 2 states that the current and long-term labor market challenges will be addressed by supporting the workforce with skilled trades and professions among young Albertans and adults seeking career transmission. Yet, there's no mention of tourism. The strategic plan makes no mention of skilled trade or employment specific to the tourism sector. So which jobs will be created and where? In meeting with stakeholders, they're concerned that tourism growth won't bring high-paying jobs like coal mining would. I'm curious what the minister's thoughts on that are. And through the chair, does the minister see the potential for high-paying, long-term jobs coming out of tourism?
Thank you for that question through the chair. Yes, absolutely. And I think that the member, I don't want to speak for the member, but I hope that all members around this table would agree that there is a tremendous upside in working at tourism. There are valuable careers, high-paying careers in tourism. And I go back to this idea that if you're not tourism, you're tourism adjacent. And I'm not talking about necessarily owning a restaurant, but you're looking at maintenance crews and the trades. We don't have it specifically as line items in the budget, but understanding that as we invest in the trades, as we invest in other education streams in the province, you can go many different directions within education, including into tourism. And just imagine what it'd be like if you're a Red Seal plumber and you wake up every day in Canmore. I mean, who doesn't want to have that kind of a beautiful vista to see? Or in the Crow's Nest Pass, or you live in Drumheller, a beautiful area of the province that we see tremendous upside for as well. So I guess the point I'm getting at is, as I feel like I have in a roundabout way answered the question already, but just to reinforce the point that there are well-paying jobs and careers in tourism, and our job here in the ministry is to make that case to our colleagues and help drive more interest in working in the tourism sector with the degrees and the diplomas that people are coming out of post-secondary with. And I'm happy to have my deputy minister talk a little bit about some of the specifics when it comes to careers and how our department and Travel Alberta is collaborating with some institutions. Particularly, I'm sure he has lots to say about SAIT.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. SAIT was awarded the top hospitality program in the world. Not Canada, the world. The minister has already mentioned that we have this roundtable of deputy ministers and ADMs. We meet on a quarterly basis. I buy bagels, which means everybody comes. But we have, I wanted to go back to the members, Mr. Chair, I want to go back to the members because there's a couple of examples of this. In talking about collaboration, it gets down to sitting down with transport and their corridor strategy to see how it aligns with the TDZs and are we looking at investments in the right places? Are we talking about broadband or cellular access to parts of the rural parts of the province that need this because this is the new visitor information center, right? But back to the education question, there are a series of pieces that the province has been working on, not just with our portfolio, but with the aviation industry, for example. Mount Royal just announced, I think 2 years ago, their management program, their aviation management program. That's a cutting edge piece. There was just an announcement of the new Lufthansa machinery and repair center that's going to be based near YYC. Those are all very high-paying technical jobs. We're working with partners to look at the simulator program. Setting up an aviation simulator program for 737s also based in Alberta, which is another huge way of training and retaining very high-level paying jobs. So while we continue to work with colleges and universities on one part of the system, there are some significant high-paying jobs in other parts of the system that are coming through. And as we build this out, a whole series, I think the minister mentioned, engineering jobs, plumbing jobs, electrical jobs, as we build out some of these pieces.
Thank you very much. So if we go to page 165 of the Ministry Business Plan, Objective 1D, it suggests that the tourism sector employment as a marker of performance. In 2019, the annual employment in the sector was over 24,000, whereas in 2023, it was below 23,000. Or, sorry, it was below. How is the minister able to say that there's high performance markers when the industry's employment has not recovered since the pandemic?
Thank you to the member for the question. So just to be clear, you're asking about the dip in employment between 2020 and 2022?
Yes, but we still haven't recovered to pre-pandemic numbers as of 2023.
Right. Well, you answered one part of the question, which was, it was COVID related. I mean, we had significant reduced, but also the issue with us is we have, we're continuing to build our tourism strategy, right? We're continuing to attract visitation, we're continuing to attract labor, and it's an ongoing work. But, you know, we've seen our visitation numbers continue to go up. We see our spend continue to go up. So as you talked about before, we see the demand for increasing labor. And I suspect that my deputy minister might have more to add on this, but what I think is important to note is you have identified an issue that is continuous, not just in the tourism sector, but it's in all sectors in Alberta. Like labor shortages are an issue because we have a thriving economy. Alberta is the beacon of hope and opportunity for the rest of the country. We're what everybody wants to be because we do it well. And so there'll always be demand for labor. But I mean, I do see the number. It's not significantly lower than pre-pandemic level numbers by about 2,000. But what I can say is we continue to build the demand and working to train more visitors, train more staff as visitors come.
Thank you. Is it possible to put the last time of this section over to my colleague?
Oh, yeah, if you would wish to cede your time, you can.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the minister. I'd like to shift gear a little bit here. So, you know, tourism happens on the same landscape as a lot of other activities in Alberta, obviously. And on public lands, tourism can occur in close proximity to resource extraction practices. In many instances, tourism may not align with resource extraction practices. And I just want to take an opportunity to zoom in on the Crow's Nest Pass a little bit because it's a great example of this conflict. So the Crow's Nest Pass is a tourism development zone in the Alberta Tourism Strategy. And it is also the site of a proposed coal mine just 7 kilometers north called Grassy Mountain. So I wonder, through the chair to the minister, how much of the Travel Alberta grant is going to the Crow's Nest Pass to develop their tourism development zone? And how is the minister reconciling a coal mine potentially going 7 kilometers north of this tourism development zone, regardless of if the mine has impact to water or wildlife or anything like that? The proposal for the mine talks about a transfer yard at the rail yard in Blairmore, which will inevitably create coal dust blowing over the communities of the pass and the surrounding trails. So is coal a compatible land use with tourism, specifically in the Crow's Nest Pass? And how much of that Travel Alberta money is going to the Crow's Nest Pass to develop their TDZ?
Well, thank you, member, for the question. And I'm happy to let my deputy minister at some point in my answer talk a little bit about the specific amount of money that's going there. As he would be the best person to ask that question. But what I can say is, when it comes to compatibility with tourism, our government and the Ministry of Tourism and Sport particularly understands that if we don't do things in isolation. And that's exactly why we did a review of the renewable projects. There was a windmill project that was planned near Hillspring, just outside of my town that I call home, Cardston. And as a result of the new mandate with protecting beautiful viewscapes, that project is no longer going ahead. So what I can say is that we are very cognizant of potential threats and opportunities in the tourism sector, but across the whole spectrum. But I think that the Crow's Nest Pass in particular has a tremendous upside for the province as a place that could be responsibly developed with more tourism attractions. And the money going there is going directly to making sure that we advertise it as such. And I'll allow my Deputy Minister and CEO of Travel Alberta to talk more about the specific investments in that area.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Those are not easy questions, but we'll see how we can get through them. We have to live in balance. You know, there are different sectors of the Alberta economy that abut each other, and I think we have done a very good job as a province, as opposed to some others, of creating space for that type of diversity. Obviously, our focus is trying to get folks to see the beauty above the ground as opposed to exploiting what's below the ground, but we know that they have to live together in compatibility. The actual investment in the Crow's Nest Pass is a tougher answer because it's not an easy place to get started. There was the minister and I were down there, I think about a year ago, meeting with council. There are some communities that are just not ready to receive tourism or not tourism ready. We actually have gone and invested in a master plan for that area. We have given them a series of options. We have invested in a couple of key properties down there. Charmed Resorts is a very good example of a very strong success down there. They know well that the ecology of the area is an important piece of that. We've invested in a couple of Indigenous outfitting operations down there. But it's a bit of while it's a spectacular part of the province, it's a bit of a flywheel trying to get the momentum, to get the community behind that sort of development. And so it doesn't happen overnight. It's a very difficult process.
Thank you. Through the chair to the minister and the deputy minister, I appreciate that it is a difficult situation, and I too have spent quite a bit of time down in the Crow's Nest Pass and in the castle, and I think that there are some very specific things that could be done to promote tourism in that space that actually do fall under the government's purview, although not necessarily in the tourism ministry. So for example, one of those opportunities is to pave the road from Blairmore to the Castle Provincial Parks, which would more directly connect that community to Alberta's most recent largest provincial park in southern Alberta. Recognizing that falls under transportation and forestry, I do hope that is something that the minister is championing with his colleagues. Because in the reality, tourism can provide longer term economic and environmental sustainability than a coal mine. And in this particular case, I don't think a coal mine is compatible. Coal dust swirling over mountain bike trails is not how people want to do cardio in the mountains. However, moving on, we're gonna run out of time here. There's also the issue of forestry operations outside of Bragg Creek that has also generated significant public concern because of impacts to tourism and recreation potential. So we're faced with these very specific issues, and I think the All Season Resorts Act is going to create more of these situations where we have tourism and recreation directly in conflict with resource extraction in the minds of the local people in the local community. And what I want to know is what is, through the chair to the minister and the deputy minister, what is the strategy to deal with these conflicts? How do we make the hard choices between tourism and resource extraction when they're both happening in the same place at the same time?
Well, through the chair, thank you to the member for the question. And I guess my short answer, which will then become a long answer, is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that I made the case earlier on in my remarks that we don't happen in isolation as the Ministry of Tourism and Sport. my colleagues are acutely aware of the demands that we have, but also the demands that will be coming as we expand tourism in places like the Crow's Nest Pass. But if you're looking for a model for success, you don't have to look too much further than our neighbors to the west in British Columbia. It was only 2.5 short decades ago that a place like Whistler was considered a garbage dump and is now one of the top places to visit in the world. It's on a number of bucket lists for people. But we think that Alberta has a Made in Alberta model for an all-season resorts program, for an all-season resorts division within the department. We have done extensive research, both me as the minister visiting with the government of British Columbia, to talk about some of the things they would have liked to do differently, have they done it earlier on. We also look at how they've done it properly in the interior, understanding that there are also resource extraction operations in British Columbia. And I think they have just over 18 true four-season resorts in British Columbia and countless other resorts. So the model for success already exists. We've seen it to the west. We're just building a Made in Alberta option. And I think that that's really important to note, because when we were going through this process, consulting with my colleagues, Minister Schultz and Minister Lowen, in forestry and parks and environment in protected areas, we had a lot of long conversations about how this All-Season Resorts Act and the process is going to respect local cultures, respect the local natural beauty and the resources in the area, without degrading them. And I think it's also important to note that tourism is regenerative. Like, you look at some of the other economic drivers in the province that are extractive. They are great for our province and great for economic development, but tourism is benefiting the area. This idea of don't touch it, that is not conservation, Mr. Chair. And I've even seen videos online of people who are visiting some of the national parks, and they're cramped up in little spaces on trails. I'm thinking that's also not conservation. People are going to continue to come to Alberta. What we're doing is working. Our plan is working. We have to find other places to put visitors who are coming here to experience Alberta. This means the All-Season Resorts Act and doing it responsibly.
With that, the first block of time is finished. We now have 20-minute time over to the government caucus. I see MLA right? And this will go, that question back to the minister of how you want to utilize the time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the minister. I'd like to have a back and forth conversation, because I'm going to jump on a couple different topics, and it just might be a little bit easier to go back and forth.
You got it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Minister, for taking the questions, and through the chair to you. With 2025's provincial budget expected to have a $2.5 billion deficit, tourism dollars and spending increases in the province are going to have a huge impact on reducing that potential deficit. I have a few questions pertaining to key objective 1.2 on page 164 of the business plan. In the fall of 2024, the government passed a all-season resort act that aims to increase tourism revenue and attract investment while balancing sustainability and preserving community interests. The new act was modeled after British Columbia's successful tourism strategy, which allowed them to develop more than 13 significant all-season resorts on Crown land. Now, it's also worth noting on this, they also did this while balancing being Canada's largest coal producer. These resorts provide year-round attraction, including skiing, hiking, mountain biking, and other outdoor activities, significantly boosting BC's economy. How does the All-Season Resort Act, as outlined in Budget 2025, incorporate environmental sustainability initiatives to balance tourism development with preserving the natural landscapes and ecosystems, as we see? And then B, in Budget 2025, how does the economic impact of developing all-season resorts compare to the current state of Alberta's tourism industry, with what key benefits are expected over the next decade?
Well, look at the timer. I don't think there's enough time to actually go over all the benefits, but I'll try to touch on as many as I can through the chair of Mr. MLA Wright. Thank you for that very thoughtful question. Well, the benefits to start off with are economic. there's no question that to reach our visitation, or rather our spend goal of $25 billion by 2035, it just can't happen without the All-Season Resorts Act. I would also say the long-term benefits are jobs, right? Creating more communities, more vibrant opportunities for people to get together and enjoy Alberta's backyard. And something I haven't touched on a lot, because we think about tourism as visitation from visitors outside of the province, but the All-Season Resorts Act is actually going to allow us to visit more of our own backyard. I don't think it's any secret that it can be expensive to go to a resort in Alberta. And some people, for many, that is cost prohibitive. So having more competition in the resorts market creates an environment where I think the cost of some things will go down, give people more opportunity to see their own backyard and experience Alberta. The other issue is that we are seeing a increased number, or at least a concerning number of visitation of Albertans into British Columbia versus British Columbians coming to Alberta. We have a spend deficit of about $1.5 billion. And what that means is Alberta residents are spending more in Alberta than BCers are spending in our province. Alberta residents are spending more in British Columbia than they are spending here. I apologize, I misspoke. And just to bring this into focus, we were looking at a resort in Alberta, and I went out to this resort early in the morning at around 7 o'clock, driving on the Trans-Canada West. And it's still dark outside of this time of year in the winter, and if you look off in the distance, you'd see what I call this lava flow of brake lights or red lights off in the distance, just as far as the eye can see. Those cars are not stopping in Alberta. Those cars are going to British Columbia. We need to give them a reason to stay at home and visit their own backyard. And so the economic benefits are there. The education benefits are there. The business opportunities are there. The chance for people to enjoy careers living in the mountains are there. And I mean, the list goes on and on. So I would say that this All-Season Resorts Act is transformational for our province's tourism sector. And I can't take a lot of credit for it. I've been the minister for just over a year and a half. But long before I got in this position, there were people working on this because they saw the success of our neighbors to the west. And so I love to give a lot of credit to people who are working on this, understanding that, to use a sports analogy, I'm really just the guy who punched it over the goal line. But to drive it down the field, a lot of other hands have touched this, and I'm grateful for them because they saw the vision that is Alberta and what we could be with this all-season resorts, and I am excited about the future.
Thank you, Minister. And through the chair, if we can jump over to visitation numbers, and you know, I look at the general visitation numbers and I see the performance indicator 1C on page 165 of the ministry's business plan tracks the number of visitors to and within Alberta. And even the minister previously just mentioned that there is a net deficit when we look at visitors from British Columbia to Alberta and vice versa. In the 2023 numbers, there was 31.7 million Albertans traveling within the province and 3.8 million Canadians traveling from outside the province, with 2.2 million international visitors from around the world. Now, with the All Seasons Act, you tied back in the conversation about getting advice or looking to British Columbia's model to bring this up. And I can't help but notice in the Crow's Nest area, British Columbia's got the 2 largest coal mines in Canada. What were some of the learnings that help British Columbia be able to drive their all-season approach while also balancing the ecological impact of the nation's 2 largest coal mines in the Crow's Nest? But how that also impacts on the number of visitors that they see along those areas. I'd like to highlight the success, however, of the ministry. In total, we went from 25.4 million visitors in 2021 to 37.7 million visitors in 2023. Can the minister also point to factors that drove this success and how some of the changes we've made can impact 2025 and forward as part of the ministry's business plan?
Thank you for that very thoughtful question. I think I'd start off by saying that British Columbia, a decade and a half ago, took a concerted effort to developing tourism, but it started at the government level. The premier of the day understood that there are ways to diversify the economy without taking from it. And that was through the resorts, by utilizing responsibly the natural resources that we have above the ground. And that started, of course, with resort developments. And so for us to match the kind of success that we've seen in British Columbia, it does require increased numbers. It requires places and resorts for people to visit, but it also requires volume. I can tell you that there's a number of products that are beginning to emerge even more today than in the past that are in high demand. Some things like Nordic spas. Nordic spas are incredibly high demand. They're very popular. We don't have very many in Alberta, but there are a number that are coming up in pretty short order. You also look at five-star accommodation. These are the kinds of things that our international visitors are looking at. And so for our success to be realized, it has to be based not just on volume of visitation, but also of yield of spend. So I do want to turn over to my deputy minister because he'll have a little more information about the kind of numbers we've been seeing over the past couple of years and how that's changing what we expect to see from a volume and a yield perspective with the all-season resorts, and generally from the tourism development zones that we planned out, and how this tourism strategy that we released February of last year is coming together and what to expect from it, from a Travel Alberta perspective.
Thanks, Minister. Mr. Chair, the member, I want to thank you for highlighting the success that we've seen, which is not just in the number of visitors, but it's also the revenue. I guess the short answer to the question is an exceptional team at Travel Alberta. But I think there's more to it than that. This province made a decision in the midst of COVID that they were going to emerge stronger and better. And they took the elements of marketing, access, and place and put them under one roof. So Travel Alberta, in its expanded mandate through the expanded legislation, became a destination management organization, not just a marketing organization. We're the only one in the country that's done this. We have won international awards for the work that we do. I was recently asked to speak at an international global leaders conference about our plan, which is, and there are different provinces have different programs. Some of them have marketing programs, some of them have air access programs, some of them have economic development programs. We're the only one where it's all under one roof. So there's been a fairly devoted vision to this. You know, the overnight success has been 3 or 4 years in the making, which is why we have the strongest, not only the strongest growth from a visitor perspective on a percentage basis, strongest revenue. We were the first province in Canada to surpass COVID numbers. We were the first province in Canada that surpassed international revenue numbers, which is really, really critical.
Thank you, Minister and Deputy Minister. Through the chair, I'd like to change up and maybe start talking about major sporting events. As my riding of Cypress Medicine Hat was a bid city for the 2026 Memorial Cup. Unfortunately, Kelowna won that. You know, these types of events are very near and dear to my heart. When I'm not in the legislature over the winter, I am coaching hockey. And I love to see that Alberta remains committed to supporting Hockey Canada, investing in events that boost economy, promote tourism, and celebrate sports that we all love. Hosting the 2027 World Junior Championships will further showcase Alberta's passion for hockey as its ability to deliver world-class events. Alberta has long been a leader in fostering hockey experience, and Budget 2025 is no exception. So how does Budget 2025 plan to ensure infrastructure and resources are in place to deliver a world-class experience for players and fans? B, beyond major tournaments like the Gretzky Cup or the World Para Hockey or Ice Hockey Championships, how will Budget 2025 help support grassroots hockey development and local events across the province? And we'll kind of stop it at that point for this question.
Sure. Well, thank you, member, for that question. And like you, I was equally disappointed that we lost the bid for the Memorial Cup. I actually have been to the Memorial Cup myself years and years ago, and it is an experience unlike anything else in junior hockey. It's really something special. So we were able to support an Alberta bid. Unfortunately, we lost it. But I think what we showed in that moment and in others is our commitment to hosting major national and international sporting events. I can't tell you how many sporting events I've been to. I mean, I could actually have a list here, and I'd be happy to go over it at some point. But what I can say is there are a number of benefits from hosting these kinds of events. One, the economic return. We look at something like the World Juniors that we're hosting in 26-27. We expect the economic benefit to be over $50 million for that. That's huge for the community. That's huge for the downtown area of Edmonton. The other benefit is people get to see Alberta, whether they're here in person as a fan, as a player, as a coach, trainer, whatever that may be, or whether you're watching on television from somewhere on Canada or around the world. All the B-roll footage of the mountains, the B-roll footage of the town, of the community, that stuff drives tourism. The other benefit of these events is the general interest in sport. I think that someone can go to an event and they can get that spark, that one spark that drives them into a sport. They can see somebody play for the first time. And we look at a hometown hero like Connor McDavid, one of the best players, if not the best player in the world. At some point, he had to say, I want to do that. I don't know when that spark hit, whether he was watching someone on television or watching a family member play the game of hockey, but at some point, he had that spark. And giving us the opportunity to host these kinds of events is what I think is a relatively small investment, has broad stroking benefits that I think it's even very difficult to measure. But we do it in economics. We certainly do it from an economic output standpoint, but the benefits are even further reaching.
Wonderful, and thank you, Minister. And Chair, I'm going to cede the remainder of my time to my colleague from Red Deer South.
Thank you. And welcome, Minister, Tourism and Sport. Those are very fun things, and Albertans and families will pay to have fun. And it's a very important area for Alberta. On page 220, line 2.2 of the estimates, tourism policy and strategy is responsible for the legislative, regulatory, and broad policy framework strategy to advance tourism. And Minister, I know you've touched on this strategy throughout estimates so far, but is there anything that you'd like to add to expand on that in terms of how do we get to our goals? What's the critical path in terms of this strategy for your ministry?
So what I would say is the critical path to success in our tourism and sports strategy really is increased visitation, increased spend on the tourism side, and on the sports side or recreation side, getting more Albertans active. At a very high level, I look at this from a wellness perspective. And I often say this, that healthy kids who learn healthy habits at a young age become healthy teens, become healthy adults. And that takes stress off of the healthcare system. It improves mental health in the province. Through the chair, honorable member, I believe that you had said that you like to go running often. It's one heck of a good way to clear your head, especially in the business that we're in. But it's also a great way to stay in shape and to focus the mind. And so if I look at myself and the work that I've done now, in the future, I want to say that we got more people playing, a bit more active. We had more people visiting the province, experiencing this beautiful place that we call home. And if I can do that, and I can say that we were successful in increasing those metrics, I just say that my time here was a success. And so that's at a very high level of what I'm looking at. I want to improve wellness in the province of Alberta, and I think we're well on our way.
Thanks for that, Minister. And I would say that Alberta has competitive advantages in respect of tourism that other provinces may not have because of our geographic location and some of the beautiful sites that we have that other provinces aren't as blessed with. I want to talk a little bit about employment. Performance indicator 1D on page 165 of the business plan does talk about tourism sector employment numbers. And we do see that there has been a steady rise in employment since COVID, which, of course, tourism suffered greatly during COVID, sometimes with government overreach and lockdowns. What are the strategies that you have in place to continue to grow employment in the tourism sector in Alberta?
Well, thank you for that question, and being cognizant of time, I'll try to be brief. But we touched on this a little bit, but we do have the tourism and hospitality immigration stream within the Alberta Advantage immigration program that was launched last spring. And that's really helping those coming to work here in these industries to gain a streamlined pathway to permanent residency. We also understand that as we recover from the pandemic, we are seeing employees that were working in Alberta or looking to work in Alberta find alternative industries during the pandemic, and they have stayed there. But one of our key pillars of the tourism strategy is to increase collaboration with our colleagues and other ministries, particularly in this instance, the Minister of Advanced Education, to develop more hospitality streams coming from post-secondary education. My Deputy Minister highlighted earlier the incredible work being done at SAIT. And this is the best hospitality program in the world. And there's no surprise that it's in the province of Alberta. But we can certainly continue to build on that success, driving interest, driving more employees and labor into the tourism sector. And I have a strong feeling that once they get working there, they're going to want to stay there. It's a pretty vibrant place to work.
Maybe I'll ask a question about the Canadian dollar. We've seen, unfortunately, the Canadian dollar has depreciated vis-a-vis the US dollar. I know that sometimes when there's change of oil prices, they've sort of determined the correlation that has to government revenues. I'm just wondering if tourism has looked at what will the impact in terms of international tourism, especially from the US, in view of the Canadian dollar, unfortunately, in many respects, depreciating vis-a-vis the US dollar.
Well, again, cognizant of time, I will say that we take into account a number of factors as we make projections in the future of visitor spend and general visitation in Alberta. The dollar is certainly one of those factors as well, but we have seen and continue to see increased visitation. But in terms of the hard numbers, I'm happy to throw it to my Deputy Minister for the next 15 seconds.
Mr. Chair, I know we're short on time, but this will be the most controversial thing that anybody said today. The dollar doesn't matter that much. The dollar retains Canadians traveling within Canada, but the surveys show. Am I allowed to finish?
Oh, no, you're not.
Okay.
So those following along at home, hopefully we can get back to that one because I was all the tremble, the trepidation here too as well. So we're moving into the lightning round, folks, to keep it really interesting for those at home, and I'll just go through the rules again into this. These are 10-minute blocks, which we're into now. They can be 5 minutes each or combined, but no one may speak longer than 5 minutes at a time. Time cannot be ceded to any other caucus member. If the time is not combined, then the member minister may speak only once. So it's also known as the use it or lose it clause. So with that, MLA Hayter, I'll turn it over to you, and you can ask that question of the minister.
Let's keep the good times rolling. Let's go back and forth.
Awesome. Through the chair, the business plan on page 166 mentions supporting safe and welcoming sport, but it lacks specific metrics on gender equity in coaching and leadership positions. One of the questions I do have is what specific initiatives and funding is in this budget that is going to increase the number of women in coaching and sports administration roles in Alberta? I'd also, based on page 166 of the business plan, there's a note of $2.5 million allocated for major sporting events. But research shows that female athletes receive significantly less media coverage and sponsorship. So I'm wondering what portion of this funding will ensure equitable promotion and support for women's events. Through the chair, women's sports historically receive less media coverage, sponsorship, and facility access. So I'm hopeful that when we'll get more specific initiatives in this budget that'll address this systemic inequalities. Sports experts consistently identify that having female coaches and role models significantly increase girls' participation. So through the chair, I'd like to know how many coaches are women in Alberta, and what funding exists in the budget to increase women's leadership position in sports. And again, through the chair, but now on page 165 of the business plan, performance indicator 1.D shows tourism sector employment at 238,500 in 2023. So given that many sports organizations rely on tourism infrastructure, what portion of the workforce development initiative specifically target increasing women's leadership in sports tourism related positions?
Okay, sure. Given that we are going back and forth, and I guarantee that I will not be able to touch or answer on all the things. If I don't, I'm happy to take the questions again, member. But what I can say is that you have raised a very important issue to me, very near and dear to my heart. As the father of a young daughter who I think has a bright athletic career ahead of her, I would not be doing my job as a minister to create a safe and welcoming place for her. It's the exact reason why we introduced the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act last fall, understanding that we are beginning to see examples of transgender athletes competing against biological women. We've also seen instances in this province where individuals have been hurt playing the sport or have lost out on opportunities. And a perfect example is Hannah Pilling, a constituent of mine by coincidence, but I'm proud to represent her and call her my employer and her family, because they are sterling examples of what you can do if you're committing yourself to recreation and sport at a young age and sticking with it. She has already won accolades as a rookie at her institution. But I would partially disagree with the member on levels of interest. If you look no further than the PWHL game that we hosted here not long ago, that was a near sold-out crowd at Rogers Place, just a stone's throw from the building that we're currently sitting in. And that was one of the most live environments I've ever been to in a sporting event. And understanding the importance of driving interest in women's sport is the exact reason we bid on the takeover tour game that had Ottawa versus Toronto. Now, it's also why through the Every Kid Can Play program, we are investing in provincial scope and municipal or local scope organizations as they continue to develop coaches, referees, access to facilities, access to equipment for everyone. My goal, again, as the minister, is to make sure that nobody, and I mean nobody, is left on the sidelines having to watch their friends play the sport they love. And so we're putting money behind these. We have events, we have sporting events that we've invested in, like the Pan-Continental Curling Championship, the 2025 FIS Slopestyle World Cup, the Slopestyle, the Halfpipe Championship. These are men's and women's events that saw athletes coming from around the world right to Alberta. And they had one heck of a time and put on one heck of a show. And I can only imagine the young women and girls who saw those events and thought, I could do that. It's doing it right in my own backyard, a chance to watch the top female hockey players in the world right here in Edmonton, the top female snowboarders right in Calgary. And then you go like all the other events that we've hosted. I have a whole list here, Mr. Chair. I can tell you that we are behind we are behind women's athletics and women's sports in this province, and we're investing directly in it. And like I said, I don't think I touched on all the answers. I'm happy to continue to go back and forth with the member on some of the other questions she asked.
Some more questions, but I'm hopeful maybe in writing that I could get back from your ministry what the specific initiatives and funding in this budget will increase the number of women in coaching and sports administration roles in Alberta. And I would really as well like to get back in writing how many coaches are women in Alberta and what funding exists in this budget to increase women's leadership positions in sports, and as well as what portion of the workforce development initiative specifically target increasing women's leadership in sport tourism related positions. But I'd also like to talk about participation gaps. So according to the Canadian Women in Sport research, 1 in 3 girls drop out of sports by age 18, compared to that in just 1 in 10 boys. So looking through the chair on page 166 of the business plan, there appear to be no specific budget allocations targeting this significant gender gap. So what specific line items in this budget address this well-documented issue? as well as in this business plan performance metric on page 166. It shows targets at overall youth participation, but it doesn't break down by gender. So I'm wondering what the current participation rate specifically for girls and young women. As well as in the ministry's performance measures on 166 of the business plan, showing youth sport participation at 55.5% in 2023 to 2024. While on page 142 of the previous year's business plan, it showed it was 60.6% in 2020-23. So I'm just hopeful that the ministry has data on whether this 5.1% decline is disproportionately affecting girls, and what specific initiatives in this budget address female-specific barriers to participation. And according back to page 166 through the chair of the business plan, adult participation in organized sports is currently only 19.9%. Does the ministry have gender disaggregated data on this metric? And what specific programs in this budget address the known barriers that prevent adult women from returning to or continuing in sport? And according to page 143 of the business plan, the ministry targets a modest increase in youth participation from 58% to 60% over 3 years. So given the known sharp decline in girls' participation during adolescence, what specific metrics and programs track and address this critical transition period for young women?
Minister,
Thank you,
back to
Mr. Chair. I most certainly will not be able to get to all the answers in that question. A lot of very important points noted, and we'll see what we can do about getting back to you on some of those ones. But what I would address, first off, the member raised a very important point. I sat down with a former Olympian and Olympian gold medalist when I became the minister, who outlined the very concerning trend of young women and girls who are leaving sports around the age of 13. And one athlete even pinpointed and said that some studies suggest that it's around February, the month of February. They've pinpointed almost to a month, which tells me that the amount of women and girls dropping out for a myriad of reasons is staggering, and we have to find a way to keep them interested and keep them active, because many of these instances, young women and girls are getting distracted from sports into things that are far less helpful and beneficial to them personally. And so that's why we've looked at reducing barriers. Barriers is the big word that we try to address in the Ministry of Tourism and Sport. The first is access to recreation facilities. That's why we introduced the $10 million Active Communities Initiative. Last year was the first year of the Active Communities Initiative where we funded a number of projects around the province, either building or revitalizing recreation infrastructure. And the purpose of this there are a number of purposes to building this. One is reducing barriers, making sure that Albertans of all ages had a place to recreate and to play. But the other part of this is understanding community centers aren't just where people recreate, but it's also where they come together and they build that sense of community. They learn more about each other. If you drive around the little dots that are Southern Alberta towns, or really Alberta in general, there's lots of beautiful little towns scattered throughout this amazing province. You'll find that the curling rink or the ice rink is the hub of the community. They have games there probably, or practices from 6 a.m. until super late if you're playing men's league hockey or women's league hockey. But somewhere else in there, they're going to have a room. They're doing birthday parties. They're doing local events, charity events, fundraisers. You name it, they're doing it there. And we have a space as a government to make sure we're funding those. The other piece is reducing the cost barrier. I touched on the Every Kid Can Play program earlier in my remarks, and I'll touch on it again because it's very important to me. This was a program that started coming out of COVID, a $4 million commitment called Return to Play, understanding that we needed to get people who were in low income situations with young kids under the age of 18 back out and being active. And that was something that we did, and we saw a very important value in that.
And with that, over to Government Caucus, Amelia Dion.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'm just going to give the opportunity for Deputy Minister Goldstein to maybe briefly finish his last answer on the Canadian dollar and how it...
Block time or back and forth?
Back and forth, please.
Okay, over to you to set the game up. There you go. Off to the races.
Mr. Chair, I welcome that opportunity, because I didn't give the other half of the answer. The currency exchange issue really pertains to the rubber tire traffic of close haul travel. So since we don't get a lot of that travel, we don't have a big U.S. city beneath us. Our colleagues in BC, Ontario, Quebec, they get a lot of rubber tire traffic. That's where the currency issue comes into play. With several studies over several years, I'm almost embarrassed to say Americans who live more than a 6-hour drive from the Canadian border don't know there is a Canadian dollar. And it's usually the exchange rate is a surprise when they get their American Express or credit card bill after they get back. So, and in this modern age, people are booking, especially long-haul travelers, are booking trips in their own domestic currency. So they're booking trips at home through their own domestic currency, so it doesn't have the same impact as you know, we used to think it did back when this was really a cash society. I hope that answers the question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for providing that additional context. That's very interesting. Minister, you know, in the last round, you were talking about fairness and safety in sport and how critical that is to ensuring that Alberta sports are accessible for all Albertans in building lifelong healthy habits, which we know sports do. And across my constituency, from parents to young athletes, I hear time and time again how important this is. I see key objective 2.6 on page 165 of the business plan details the ministry's goals to implement the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act to increase safety for women and girls in sport. And that's a delicate balance where the act helps ensure trans women have the opportunity to participate in the sport of their choice in a way that is equitable for all athletes without compromising the safety or the fairness of competition. So through the chair, Minister, how does the investment in fairness and safety in sport initiatives ensure consistent enforcement of the act? And Minister, I'm also wondering if you can provide some examples of how the introduction of this act has or will encourage women and girls remain in their chosen sport. And then also as well, just throw in a second question there if you can answer that as well. What steps is the government of Alberta taking to address a decline in female participation of sport? I know we talked about this in the last round, and I'm specifically interested in how the increased funding towards the Fairness and Safety in Sport initiative aims to encourage more young girls and women to participate in physical activity and sport.
Thank you, member, for that question. I think I want to start by pointing something out, and we all love to watch the Olympics. Everyone loves to see the world-class events. But something I really enjoy to watch that I don't know if everyone pays attention to is the medal ceremony. And watching the athletes at the top of the podium, the very top. And they all have mixed reactions about winning a gold medal, whether they're crying, they're singing the national anthem, or they're just standing there listening, taking everything in. And I cannot even begin to imagine what that would be like. But the emotions going through, I would have to imagine, are a result of years of preparation and training leading to what could be a 10-second race, or it could be, you know, a 60-minute hockey game. But all that preparation for years is built up to that one moment where you have the opportunity to shine. And some of them rise to the occasion, some of them don't. And that's the heartbreak of defeat or the thrill of victory. But you see the look on the athletes' faces. And now imagine someone not being able to accomplish that because of competing in what I think is an unfair environment. And we have to address that as a province. We have seen this both with Hannah Pilling at a very real level. Someone who is competing for a provincial championship, or an opportunity to compete in a provincial championship, who was going to not be allowed to do that because of losing to a transgender athlete. We also look at another athlete playing basketball, I believe in Red Deer, who was severely concussed as a result of a play competing against a transgender athlete happening right here in Alberta. It is my job as the minister to step in and create an environment that is welcoming and safe for female athletes. Because the statistics on this are real. 95% of female executives are former athletes. 95%. And you also look at the investments we are making, to the previous member's question. We are investing $45,000 in an annual operating grant to InMotion Network that helps support women in sport leadership. We understand the value of having women in athletics and sport and having women in the business place. We all benefit from that. And I would be heartbroken, and I was heartbroken, to hear Hannah Pilling's story. And I knew that I had to act and do something about it. And that's why, in conjunction with feedback we received from stakeholders, we implemented, or we tabled the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act. And we will continue to work with provincial sport organizations, post-secondary institutions, and school boards with the implementation of this. And we expect this to be implemented in the fall as we're finishing up the regulations. But we have committed upfront $2 million to ensure that as needs arise, we are adapting to the needs of things like co-ed divisions. I've said this time and time again. Everyone deserves a chance to play. Everyone, regardless of any circumstance, you deserve a chance to play, and we're going to help make that happen. But we're also going to make sure that those young women and girls who are reaching that age of 12, 13 years old, reaching puberty, who are traditionally dropping out of sport for a number of reasons, not the least of which is concern for safety and fairness, we're at least removing that barrier. And that's the exact reason we introduced the bill. And that's why we're going to continue to work with our PSO, provincial sport organizations and others to make sure we get it right. And that is the whole purpose of this.
Thank you, Minister, for your leadership and your initiative taken to protect women and girls in sport. I'll switch gears a bit, but it's very much along the same thread, that sport and physical activity are essential for maintaining public health, promoting communities, and enhancing personal wellness. And we know that regular participation in sport and physical activity has a wide range of physical and mental health benefits, especially for children and young people, future CEOs. I can't emphasize enough how important that sport and recreational facilities, how important they are to meet the evolving needs of our communities and our growing populations. And I think this looks a little different in rural Alberta, where we have our amazing agricultural societies play a big role in engaging with the communities. They provide public spaces for meeting, and they host incredible events, particularly for our iconic provincial rodeo sports, which I particularly enjoy. So these are just great opportunities to enhance physical wellness. So I see on page 7 of the capital plan, there it outlines a $5 million investment allocated towards the Strathmore Event Centre in my constituency. So can the minister please expand on this project?
Well, thank you for that question, and I'd love to expand on it, but I think the bulk of the credit, if not all of it, needs to go to the local MLA, who has done a tremendous job advocating for her constituency through the chair. I say this, understanding that we represent communities around Alberta, and they all have needs, making an important case on why that community needs sporting infrastructure or a place to congregate, like the Western Events and Cultural Center. It's exciting news. It is great news. We're looking at a building that's going to have 99,000 square feet, including a 55,000 square foot riding arena, 9,430 square feet of performing arts theater, and 300 rentable horse stalls, just to name a few things. Now, the anticipated capital cost for this project is going to be around $20 million, as I'm sure the member knows. But our $5 million contribution will help to leverage the additional contributions of other orders of government and private corporations. This is a perfect example of the community coming together around sport and recreation and building community. And we talked a little bit earlier, and the member mentioned this, about recreation and having more executives, female executives. I'd also say more female politicians. I've in female department staff. Where I'm surrounded on this table by incredible, accomplished women on both sides of the aisle, and I'm honored to call you my colleagues. But I think that we are all products of our environment, and if that environment is always enriched by abilities to get together, to communicate, to build community, to build family bonds, and I think that this Western Events and Cultural Center is a perfect example, and I have to give all the credit to the local MLA through the chair, Ms. DeYoung.
Very much, Minister. This will benefit Albertans for generations to come. Thank you.
That just made me all warm and gushy inside. That was excellent, you guys. MLA Goring, you're on the list first, if I'm not
Thank you
mistaken.
very much, Mr. Chair. And as you referred to this being the lightning round, I'm hoping to just put my questions on the record and then have the minister respond.
Okay, so you're looking for block time?
Yes, please.
Okay, and back to the minister.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, just because it's short time. So on page 165 of the business plan, Alberta receives 2.2 million international travelers a year. How many of those are US travelers? And has the ministry done any risk assessment on the impact tariffs could have on Alberta's tourism growth? On sport and recreation development, community sport and recreation infrastructure, on page 221 of the government estimates, support for sport, physical activity, and recreation is decreasing by $4.8 million. How will this impact the organizations that have been receiving grants? And are you aware of any organizations that will no longer be receiving grants due to this cut? If so, which ones? Overall, sport, physical activity, and recreation is getting a cut of $3.76 million, shown on page 221 of the business plan. This comes at a time when the ministry has set goals to grow the number of youth and adults participating in sport and recreation, which is on page 166 of the business plan. What impact will these cuts have on the ministry's goal to grow sports and recreation in the province? How will sports and recreation organizations be impacted by these cuts? And how is the ministry planning amidst these cuts to grow participation in sport? I struggle to see how you can say you want to grow it, yet you're creating a cut. Sport affordability and participation. Alberta has ambitious targets for increasing youth participation in sport, 66% by 2026-27. What specific measures are in place to make sport more affordable to families? I know you mentioned a lot about the Kid Can Play program, so I'm looking for specifics around that. So that is mentioned on page 28 of the STRAT plan, priority 2. It says increasing affordable access to sport and rec for youth and families for low-income families. If you could identify what the threshold for low-income families is, and where in the budget is that program accounted for? And I'm curious, because we know that Albertans are struggling all across the province with the increased cost of living, et cetera, are there any new subsidy programs to help lower-income families access organized sports? So the next question is, how is the ministry supporting local sports organizations struggling with overall rising costs? In the ministry's 2024 business plan, it says roughly 80% of Alberta adults and youth were participating in recreation with a growth target of 85% for 2025. However, on page 166 of the 2025 business plan, the 2025 target has fallen to 60% for youth and 58% for adults. What's caused these numbers to drop so drastically? The number of Albertans involved in recreation fell by 22% for youth and 31.7% decrease for adults. How is a funding cut to recreation organizations justified when the number of Albertans accessing these critical programs that support their health and well-being have fallen so considerably in the last year? Page 166 of the Ministry Business Plan 2A, the 2025 target percentage of Alberta youth participating in sport has fallen by 6% between 2024 and 2025. How is the ministry increasing participation outside of funding hockey arenas, small to mid-sized projects? How are we addressing affordability in this budget? The 2024 RMA, they conducted a report on rural volunteer participation, decreasing all across the province. It's directly impacting participation. If you don't have the volunteers, the infrastructure becomes redundant. I'm curious if there's any plan within this ministry to increase access to volunteers and help support volunteer recruitment. On page 221 of government estimates 3.3 and 3.4, there's a decrease in the budget lines. We want to increase the involvement and performance measure, yet cutting funding to those two lines. Again, Minister, it doesn't make sense. 3.2 is sport, physical activity, and rec development. Again, back to the volunteer recruitment. It's a slight improvement in funding, but what is the strategy? Is it enough funding increase? Thank you very much.
And over to you, Minister.
Okay, certainly a lot to unpack there, but I do appreciate the opportunity to answer some of those questions. And I also want to thank the member who has led, obviously, the discussion on the opposition side today. A lot of very thoughtful questions today. This is where, we clearly understand, and I think we are on the same wavelength when it comes to wanting to do better by Albertans, increase wellness in the province. So I genuinely want to thank her for her work on this in preparation for this committee. To talk initially about the decrease in funding, this wasn't a decrease in funding going to provincial sporting organizations. It was a decrease in the budget because we had initially planned for the allotments for the Hockey Canada investment. That was an $11 million investment that we put for the games that I mentioned before about the para ice hockey, the 2 Hlinka Gretzky tournaments, the 2 rivalry series games between Canada and the U.S., and then the hockey camps, and then of course the last pinnacle, I guess you would say, or the premier event, which would be the 2027 IIHF World Junior Championship. So it wasn't necessarily a funding decrease, as it was that money was allocated for those 2 years, and it's no longer a line item in our budget going forward because you made those disbursements. With regards to sporting infrastructure, I'm trying to read my handwriting like I'm back in grade 10 history, frantically trying to keep notes. So member, you'll have to forgive me if I don't touch on all the answers. But with regards to subsidy programs, there are no new programs. We are maintaining funding for the Every Kid Can Play grant, as well as the Active Communities Initiative programs. Those 2, I think, have seen tremendous subscription, and I have visited firsthand with the families who have benefited from this. We just did our podium announcement at the MMP Center in Calgary, which was a host for us, and a number of families came and they talked specifically about the benefits of that program. In addition to the Active Communities Initiative and the Every Kid Can Play grant, we also have one-off investments like the MMP Center in Calgary. It is a massive recreation facility with a pool and basketball courts. And I'll digress for a moment and say I had one of the best dunks of my career in that facility. It was pretty awesome. But all that aside, we put $20 million into that facility, understanding that it is a recreation community building hub for everything from playing sports to doing CPR courses and everything in between. We also talked about how we are supporting teams struggling with costs. The cost to play sports continues to go up. This does go back to the Every Kid Can Play grant, but I think it also talks about us funding provincial sport organizations. My department staff will probably have a better ability to explain all the metrics that go into determining the amount of funding each provincial sport organization gets. But suffice to say that we are funding over 70 provincial sport organizations, helping them with their operational costs and making sure they're meeting the mandate of overseeing sports and recreation in their respective fields or sports of focus. So I think it's important that we continue along those lines. I continue to meet with PSOs, or provincial sport organizations, because we don't get involved in the day-to-day operations, but it's important for us to understand the strengths and opportunities and weaknesses that they're dealing with so we can better adapt. Money isn't always the answer when it comes to dealing with struggles that provincial sport organizations have. It can often be issues of whether they have the facilities or whether there's governance issues. So regardless of the problems that they're facing, we're involved. We're here to be a support system for them. And so for me, I think it's important that we continue along that path. With regards to tariffs, this is a precarious environment that we're facing. As the finance minister said in his budget remarks, it's not without precedence, but it is a storm that we're going to have to weather as Canadians and as a province. We built in, I think, measures in the budget that address potential fallout from tariffs, but there are things that we just don't know as a ministry, and we will continue to work with our stakeholders across the board to help them adapt and deal with what can be a tumultuous term with the current U.S. president. But what I want to do is give a lot of credit to our premier, who has spent a significant amount of time across the United States line, meeting with legislators and the president himself to make the case for Alberta. Heaven knows the federal government is failing us. The federal government is failing all Canadians. And if they truly cared about Canada and the well-being of the people who live in this incredible country, they would call an election so we can have solid leadership in Ottawa instead of deal with the dog and pony show that is their internal party squabbles.
And over to the government caucus. MLA Seer?
Yes, please. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the staff for this wonderful evening. You've done a very good job. I don't have a lot of time, 44 seconds to be exact. I'd like to thank the Minister for the recent announcement for $750,000 under the Active Community Initiative Grant to Elk Point. Thank you so much. My community really thanks you for that. And I'm also thanking you for the 2026 Alberta Winter Games that you had brought to my communities up in my area as well. That just shows how much support that this ministry is looking to bring to Northeast Alberta. And I think that's an important commitment that I'm seeing from your department, Minister. So thank you so much for your commitment to my constituency. And I look forward to seeing, hopefully, you up for the 2026 Winter Games.
All the credit goes to you, member. Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize for the interruption, but I'm advised the committee that the time allotted for consideration of ministry's estimates is concluded. I'd personally like to thank everybody for playing along, keeping the decorum, the questions and the answers as succinct as possible. Appreciate that. I'd like to remind committee members we're scheduled to meet with the tomorrow, March 11th, 2025 at 9 a.m. So check your watches there, 9 a.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Immigration and Multiculturalism. And with that, thank you, everyone. Meeting adjourned.